Hello, everybody. I know that everyone was having some difficulties in being able to hear the audio for my presentation. So I am going to be going through and sharing this slideshow with the audio attached with it. I apologize for the audio difficulties. I was trying to find every link that possible that I could provide to you all for the audio. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow. Hello, everybody. My name is Adriana Leon, and I will be presenting my presentation on the Experiential Learning Theory by David Kolb. So before we get started, I would love to explain why I decided to use or research this learning theory. So just the basic understanding that, each student, each person, all of us, we have a different way of learning, a different way, a style, so to speak, of how we learn. So, for instance, we have visual learners where those learners like to see images, like to visually see things pan out in order to understand. So those are the visual learners. They like to see things happen. And then we have the auditory learners. Those learners like to kind of hear. So if a teacher is just saying the instruction, they'll understand it immediately. They'll understand it, process it, and awesome. They'll be able to implement it. Then we have those students who like the reading and writing learning style, which through reading, so reading a textbook or a passage, they're able to really utilize that information, have it stuck in their head, and they're able to utilize and present what they know and understand. Then we have those students who like to write. So whether that be studying, where they like to write and rewrite all of these different sentences and stuff to help them study, that's the best way that they like to use in order to, understand the concepts. But for myself, I identify more as a kinesthetic learner where I learn better when I'm actually doing something. So kind of acting it out or, being in a position to where I'm involved in it so I can actually physically do it, physically see it. I'm more of a kinesthetic learner, and that actually ties into the presentation that I have for you all today. So without further ado, let's get started. So before we get into the actual specifics of the experiential learning theory, we are going to be talking and discussing a little bit about the theorist, David Kolb. He is imaged in the right here on the presentation. He was born on December 12, 1939 in Moline, Illinois. His previous education includes a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, Philosophy, and Religion that he had received at Knox College. He also has a PhD in Social Psychology from Harvard University, which is awesome. He's considered an educational theorist and psychologist who founded the theory of experiential learning, which we will be talking more about in depth in the following slides. He also researched and wrote 6 of his own books. So the first one was The Experiential Learning, Experience as the Source of Learning and Development. The Experiential Educator, Principles and Practices of Experiential Learning, which, just a little side note, I actually, it was required for me to have that book in one of my classes the past few years ago, which was really awesome. I was able to kind of learn more about experiential learning, which again, we will discuss in the following slides. The third book was How You Learn is How You Live, Using 9 Ways of Learning to Transform Your Life. The fourth was Conversational Learning, an Experiential Approach to Knowledge Creation. The fifth was the Innovation in Professional Education, Steps on a Journey from Teaching to Learning. And the sixth was Organizational Behavior and Experiential Approach. So as of today, he is currently a professor of organizational behavior at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. To understand the specifics of the experiential learning theory, it's important for us to identify and understand what experiential learning is, okay? So experiential learning is basically having these specific techniques, okay, or mechanisms that someone can use and implement in order for them to meet certain learning goals or to acquire information, okay? So learning by doing, then reflecting. So there are 4 stages of the experiential learning theory, and as we will understand a little bit later, that they don't specifically have to go in order. So not everything has to start with concrete experience. We'll get into the specifics in a minute, but let's just go through each step and just understand what each part of the cycle is explaining, okay? So for instance, let's not call it the first because it doesn't have to be the first step, but for concrete experience, okay? So concrete experience is basically just when students, engage in an experience, okay? So for instance, when you're trying a new task or actually doing that task, you're having a in-person experience, okay? So that's concrete experience. For the second, not second step, just one of the next part of the cycle is reflective observation. So within a reflective observation, usually students are able to reflect on that previous experience that they had, okay? So they can identify maybe some connections, maybe some inconsistencies or possible alignments between the experience and their, previous knowledge that they may have had. Maybe, for instance, giving observations or maybe being asked questions, just doing this reflective process, reflective observation of what they kind of experienced, okay? So the next part the next section of the cycle that we can talk about is, conceptual thinking or abstract conceptualization, okay? So through reflection, okay, so through reflection, we are able to generate our own new understandings, ideas, and modify maybe my pre-existing conceptualizations of certain ideas or concepts, and I'll be able to use those and draw conclusions and make possible hypotheses, okay? So for instance, be able to make sense of what I had just experienced. So basically kind of fitting what you had learned into everything you already know so that maybe it can all make sense together. So example would be, creating a model. So you're using everything that you learn in order to create a model so you're able to kind of demonstrate what you've learned and then presenting those ideas, okay? For the next kind of part would be active experimentation. And this would include kind of us or the students, plan and test their conclusions or possible hypotheses that they had come up with. And they would do this by applying their knowledge to the new experiences that they had experienced. I think what's important for us to understand and to keep in mind is that the moment we start planning and start doing, we re-enter step 1 or one of the cycles of the Kolb's learning cycle again, okay? So as you can see, based on this cycle right here that we see to the right, that this model is continuous, right? It's a cycle. So that means you can pass through it and pass through the 4 steps multiple times. So this is just kind of another way and understanding, which is really awesome by David, that you can see it as another way of saying that you can learn from your experiences over time as well. So as we have already explained and went through the not steps, but the parts of the experiential learning theory cycle, we are going to be looking at 2 different cycles here, which are the same. It's the same experiential learning theory / cycle, but one's a little bit more simpler to kind of understand and explain. So let's look at the left one, which is basically the one that we had looked at on the previous slide. So we have the top middle, okay? So it says act. So that's basically explaining the concrete experience part of the cycle, okay? So it's the facts. It's what happened, okay? You're taking action, all right? So it's a better way to kind of think of it. The next one, if we were to go to the right, kind of clockwise, we're going to look at reflect, which is just the next part of the cycle, which is the reflective observation part, okay? So those are the connected feelings, what did I observe? What did I experience during this? Just kind of being able to reflect. The next part would be conceptualize, okay? So it's that abstract conceptualization that we had talked about in the previous slide, where you have these certain findings after you had, experience that concrete experience, then you understand that you have feelings associated with that, and now we have those certain findings, right? So why did this happen? We're trying to conceptualize, understand, break it down. Why did this happen, okay? So then the next part, we have the apply, which is the active experimentation, okay? We're applying that. We're trying to understand or utilize or connect to what will I do as far as, hypotheses, kind of possibly proving that correct, proving it incorrect, applying what you had learned or experienced into finding an answer for that, okay? So that's apply, that's active experimentation. So if we were to look at the one on the right, we see that's just more of a simpler kind of understanding. So that concrete experience, which is just the do it part. The next part would be the reflective observation, which is what happened, what were the results. Abstract conceptualization would be the so what. So what do these results imply? What does this mean? How did I influence the outcome? And then the last one, the active experimentation, would be now what? What will I do differently next time? Okay, so as we look at these cycles, they kind of play a huge role on the understanding through the experiential learning theory and process, or cycle if you want to think about it like that. But what's important that we're going to be talking about in the next slide, which will be our last slide, is that the theory focuses on two different levels, okay? Like the one we had just explained, where there's 4-stage cycle of learning, okay? There's 4 stages. We have the concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. But there's another level to this as well, which are 4 separate learning styles that are connected with this, okay? And that kind of ties into why and how, the steps of the learning cycle can be followed in a sequence, but depending on the type of learning style that a person may have, they can enter the model at any stage. Okay, so we're going to get into the explanation as to how that can happen next. As stated in the previous presentation slide, we understand that the Kolb's learning cycle can be followed in a specific sequence, but it's also important to understand that you can enter the model at any stage, and this is important for us to understand due to the simple fact that not only does this cycle include 4 steps of the learning process, which one of them is the concrete experience, which leads into the reflective observation, then follows the abstract conceptualization, and then into the active experimentation, okay? As we can see in this picture image here on the presentation. But it's also important to understand that the model also kind of gives us 4 different learning styles, which are outlined in the different colors here. So for the orange, we have the diverging learners, which, they feel and they watch, they kind of understand that way. Then we have the assimilating learning style, where you have to think and watch, which is between the reflective and observation and abstract conceptualization. So they can start in the reflective area, or they can start in the abstract conceptualization. And then we have converging learners, which are the thinkers and doers. And then we have the accommodating learning styles, which are the feelers and doers, okay? So to understand this is that this theory, the experiential learning theory, focuses on those 2 levels. So the first level is the 4 stages of the cycle learning: the concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. And it also has 4 separate learning styles, okay? And those focus on the cognitive processes of the developing brain. And that's really, really important, especially David Kolb's background, especially. So it's important to understand that no matter which stage you start at, through the type of learner that a particular person may start, so starting at the assimilating learner, the converging learner, you must understand and to, make sure that you're meeting this experiential learning theory, or to make a deeper connection and meaning with the specific material that you're learning, you must go through each of these steps to do so. So no matter what type of learner you are, converging, accommodating, you can start at active experimentation, but you must complete the concrete experience, the reflective observation, and the abstract conceptualization. Yeah, you must complete all 4 of those learning processes in order to, define whether you have made a meaningful experience or meaningful learning experience from a particular experience that you had, okay? So in discussing the contributions to the education, I think it's important for us to understand David Kolb's background, okay? So for instance, understanding that he has a degree in psychology, okay, philosophy, and then he also has a master's in social psychology, which also, being a current professor also contributes to education, where he's, consistently teaching his students, consistently, the 6 different books that he has read. He's contributed very, very much to education. And, I think that also connects to my own experiences where in one of my classes, we actually had one of his textbooks in there, and I was able to learn, more about the experiential learning theory, and to make sure, the instruction, the material that we are giving to students makes meaningful experiences for them, so then they can really take what they learned and understand it like deeply, so they can apply it to something else. So to add on to that, as far as understanding how this theory continues to improve education, one of the most important things of David Kolb's life is that this experiential learning has been proven to be one of the most widely used theoretical frameworks in education. Understanding that the brain and the processes of the brain, understanding that in his own, research of the brain development and stuff like that, and to understand how the brain works, is really, really important for us teachers to understand. And this helps us improve in education, learning from him, learning from what he has, taught us through this cycle, learning that, for us educators, it's important for us to gain that basic understanding of the cognitive processes that our students may be going through at certain ages and stuff like that. And to make sure, with utilizing this experiential learning theory, and to understand the different, stages of the cycle, to understand and connect maybe to the material instruction in a way to where it's incredibly important and meaningful for the students, so then they can create those deeper connections and meanings, okay? Also, this entails, maybe more live experiences, more demonstrations, more intriguing ones as well. I think I can speak for a lot of teachers, trying to get the attention of students and to make sure, certain topics and standards are covered in a way to where they really understand it, not just kind of passing these, standardized tests just for the moment, but understanding the concepts deeply and more importantly, and is very, very important. And I think that, understanding this theory in all its forms, where the cognitive processes are really important to understand, and to understand where our students are at. So with this is the end of my presentation. I hope all of you enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to the feedback and questions in our discussion post. So thank you so much, and I hope all of you have an amazing day. Bye-bye. So that is it. I apologize again for the, audio problems and issues that everyone was facing, but here is the video, and I hope all of you enjoy.